Hello, everyone. Welcome to the AI4 AI Learning and Development panel. Thank you for being here. Today, we have a 50-minute panel with some of the senior L&D people in the field. I'm going to take a couple minutes here to do some warm introductions. I'm Spencer Stebbins, the head of AI4 training, and we have some open enrollment courses for technical and executive level participants, as well as we facilitate companies or enterprises in navigating the AI landscape. So if you are seeking the right partner for some curriculum development, the right format to meet your enterprise upskilling needs, please reach out on our website. Let's start first with Graeme. Graeme.
Hi, I'm Graeme Malcom from Microsoft. I work in our worldwide learning division, and there I'm responsible for our curriculum for certification for data science and AI.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Katie?
Hi, I'm Katie. I'm Senior PM at Twitter for a program called Twitter University, which is our internal education program specifically for all technical training. So we serve all of the Eng departments at Twitter.
Thank you, Katie. Elizabeth.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Greene, and I'm the Director of Global Learning and Development at Semiconductor, and I lead our global training efforts when it comes to leadership and professional development.
Great, and finally, last but not least, Mike Baker.
Hi, Mike Baker. I'm actually the Director of all AI programming training from a training perspective at Comcast.
Wonderful. We have a very talented panel here. We've pre-prepared some questions on how you all navigate the AI landscape within your company. And why don't we just jump right into it? So the first question I have is, how much of a priority is L&D at your company? Do you find the budget and mandate growing over the years? And if possible, please use some hard examples here.
I guess it's kind of interesting for us because there's both an internal facing and an external facing aspect to how we approach skilling. Over the recent years, Microsoft's leadership has very much emphasized the importance of skilling. We describe ourselves as a learn-it-all company. So there's a huge encouragement internally to learn and a huge investment in skilling programs internally. And then on the external side, working in worldwide learning, we are kind of at the forefront of Microsoft's initiative to go in and bring skills to the community, both to our customers and just generally to the world at large. We recently, at the end of June, we announced a big investment in worldwide skilling, really to kind of help address some of the problems that are going to be raised by the current COVID crisis, but just generally to improve skills in AI, IT, technology generally across the board, on the basis that a rising tide kind of raises all ships. So it's in our interest as a technical company and as a member of that worldwide community to be contributing there. So it's a huge thing at Microsoft.
Great, thank you.
And this is Elizabeth. I will say I'm under the HR umbrella at Semiconductor, and we have had a huge culture initiative that focuses on two key priorities for the organization. One is on innovation, and then two is on learning and development. So this year we have that focus and buy-in from the executive team and the board that gives us this opportunity to take on large-scale initiatives to drive that culture of learning across the organization. And so next year, we're budgeting for a competency overhaul and implementation of a new competency model to make sure that we're keeping up with industry trends and top business priorities. So we know that digital and tech initiatives are ranked #1, according to Gartner, when they asked a group of board of directors and their priorities. So we want to make sure that our competencies reflect the emerging, disruptive, and innovative skills trends. So I would say, yes, our company is definitely invested in making L&D a priority.
Fantastic.
This is Katie.
I'm happy to...
Oh, go.
Good, Katie.
I think
Okay.
Katie jumped in. Let's go.
Okay.
Yeah,
So at Twitter, I would say that, so I've been working at Twitter for 2.5 years, and I feel very fortunate that when I came in, I learned that leadership was already really bought into learning and development across the whole company. I mean, we have a few different learning teams who focus on different functions, but for me, like what really helps make it a priority is that it's from the top down. Like leadership is willing to invest. There's a lot of visibility because Twitter does a peer-to-peer training model for technical training. That visibility from leadership really makes it a priority for people who want to teach classes to each other. So it's not just attending trainings, it's also teaching. And we've built that into our growth ladders. So, you know, given all the trade-offs for their time, people, you know, feel like they are able to say, oh, I want to be involved in that, I want to participate because I've heard leadership say it matters, and it can specifically weigh in when I'm up for promo. So really that visibility from the top down is what keeps it as a big priority and like keeps people engaged with our program.
Right, and from our perspective, learning and development is a critical component of anyone's experience at Comcast, but specifically within the artificial intelligence and machine learning space. We're very fortunate in that I actually regularly attend an advisory board meeting where I sit down with all of the senior executives within our company to talk about learning strategy, and as it unfolds, we do something very similar to what Katie mentioned. This peer-to-peer learning is definitely a very hot trend within our space. We have access to a lot of talent that exists within our ranks, and it's our job to try and mine the gold that exists within our ranks. So that's essentially what we're trying to do.
I think that's fantastic. I think that's a great segue to our next question, which is, although this is a panel on AI learning and development specifically, what do you find are the most pressing AI or data science or even software engineering skills you're prioritizing at your company? Are you training employees in foundational courses like principles of data science, statistics in general, or are there specific role-based skills, role-based courses or platform-specific skills like TensorFlow or Google Cloud Platform that are capturing more focus within your firm? I know Graeme can answer.
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
I think the answer is yes. We sort of think, particularly in the kind of AI and data science space in a company like Microsoft, even if we just think about it internally, there's a huge constituency of roles. And we sort of think about it as being a bit like a pyramid. So you have a small number of people with very advanced, very specific requirements. So if I'm a senior fellow in Microsoft Research, my training needs and my learning needs around AI and data science are very different than if I'm a technical account manager in the field. So we have this kind of large, broad constituency with a lot of different requirements. We tend to think in the main, if we leave those kind of tip of the pyramid specialists aside because they're kind of a special case, but if we take the kind of broad view, we generally think of two kind of levels. We think about a fundamentals level, where really it's about understanding the concepts, understanding the space and the technologies that are at play in that space. And those technologies might be open source technologies like TensorFlow or Scikit-learn or PyTorch or whatever, or they might be Microsoft specific technologies like Azure Machine Learning or the cognitive services, or some combination of them all. So there's a fundamentals level where it's just kind of getting the landscape, getting the map of what is this thing, what is, regression, what are the frameworks I can use to do that kind of thing. And then there's a more sort of practitioner level. There's the people who are in role, who are doing perhaps ML ops. They're actually productionizing models and managing them in the enterprise, or they're combining their machine learning with other enterprise data tools like Azure Data Factory or Cosmos DB or something like that. So we have that kind of multi-level view of things and try and meet whatever needs are required at whatever level, whether that's open source and general skills or Microsoft technology specific skills.
So all your courses are on AWS is what you're saying?
All of our courses are what, sorry?
Are on AWS?
Not many of them are on AWS, that's for sure.
Okay. I think Graeme would definitely have a opinionated answer to this question. For a company that's not Microsoft, that has their own internal platform-specific data science tool here, let's turn to someone like Mike here. Well, how do you go about choosing the platforms, or is that even a consideration? Do you choose platform-specific skills? You go through that, or is it more, as Graeme is saying, principles related?
Yeah, and actually to draw upon what Graeme had mentioned about the pyramid, we see the bulk of the need existing at that practitioner level. And as a matter of fact, in our company, we actually were fighting a bit of a cultural war. As a matter of fact, our frontline folks were of the opinion that AI was going to somehow lead to job replacement and, job elimination. So what we were fighting was a bit of this cultural war to try and help folks see that AI was actually really good for everybody. And to do that, we actually helped them to see that by using the voice remote product X1, we were able to achieve tremendous success with our customers. And then by showing that success through our training programs, we communicated out the success that we experienced. And, that led to a series of cultural events with our frontline staff. And then for our business leaders, we actually conducted some courses to help them make better data-driven decisions. So from that perspective, this has been a tremendous win for us within our company. And then, of course, to complete the rest of the foundational metaphor, we actually take our technical folks and bring them through a battery of really foundational topics like SQL, stats, Python programming, and then we work our way up into the more, rudimentary elements of random forests and neural networks and so forth. So yeah, from our perspective, that's where things are from a prioritization perspective, Spencer.
It's a follow-up question before we continue. Do you find that you're doing this industry-specific data sets or industry-specific applications of data science? I know when I was speaking to Katie, a lot of the way she teaches internal skills is using Twitter data. So do you want to take a second there to follow up on that, Katie, and then maybe we can get back to you, Mike?
Sure. So yeah, you asked, do we do foundational or platform specific skills? And it's both for us, because we're trying to teach those foundational skills using platform specific examples so that people can see it in terms that they're familiar with and use it on data sets they actually care about. So we're working actively and trying to enable employees in all roles, like not even just technical roles, to learn how to effectively access data and also accurately analyze it. And we use Twitter data a lot for that, since we teach all in-house. We can use proprietary data, and also privacy is a huge priority for us. So really trying to teach all employees, if you're using data, and we're going to teach you how to analyze it, but you need to know how to do that ethically. You need to know how to keep people's data private and use it appropriately. So it's all platform specific for us, but we're teaching the foundational skills as we do that.
Interesting.
Yeah, and from our side, Spencer, we actually are looking at things like customer churn and studying that, and then bringing those examples into our lesson plans and so forth. But yeah, we're using Comcast data. But as Katie mentioned, data privacy is a very, very strictly enforced thing that we're managing within Comcast.
Great. Elizabeth, you want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, so we're at the beginning stages of all of this, which I remember telling Spencer in the beginning, we're conceptualizing what we want this to look like across the organization. So we have several different layers of individuals that need different types of AI data science skills and training. So we're starting with foundational skills, just helping our managers make better data-driven decisions. And then we're diving into our manufacturing site. So 25,000 of our employees are in manufacturing. So the impact of Industry 4.0 automation and manufacturing is impacting our need to upskill and reskill as we're looking at autonomous robots, automated inspections, smart logistics, things like that, where we need a deeper level of skills. So we're kind of pulling apart depending on your role within the organization and then filtering through the content based on your role.
Great, thank you so much. So I think a major component of, before even getting to the upskilling itself, is assessing what is your current skill level of your employees. And often this is a question that's somewhat overlooked. We have an internal mandate to upskill, and then we go out and either procure it or develop something internally, but it really does start with first assessing the skill set. So I want to ask, how often and how does your company assess your employees' skills? And how much do these assessment results impact your L&D plans directly? So Elizabeth, why don't we begin with you this time?
Yeah, so right now our formal cadence is once a year. We have a set of foundational core competencies that span across the organization. So regardless of job or location, so we assess employees' competencies annually during the performance appraisal process, and then L&D gathers that data to see where the gaps exist. It helps drive some of our learning initiatives for the next year, and then also validates our learning impact from the previous year. So when you get down to the individual job role, we do not have a standard process yet in place for assessing job-specific skill sets across the organization. I would say our manufacturing sites have a stronger set of roles-based skill expectations that are tied to equipment and tied to internal audits. So that's where our goal in 21 is to partner with a vendor to create a competency-based job description and a strong set of competencies that tie into each job role, and then really find the gaps and provide training to fill those gaps. It also helps with our talent mobility and really lining up skills for open job roles internally as well.
Great. For whoever's going to answer next, if we could also maybe, I'm curious how, when you're assessing your employees' skills, are these assessments developed internally, or are you using third-party providers for those assessment tests to then adjust your L&D plans accordingly? Elizabeth, you look like you're shaking your head like you want to answer this before I move on.
I'm like, yeah, it's a great question. It's internal right now, but as we're looking at the competency-based job descriptions, we're looking at external assessments to help us really narrow down, because we have a small L&D team to accommodate our global population. So we're typically looking at third-party assessments to make sure that we've covered our bases.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Mike?
and
Oh, Katie. All right.
Every time
She jumped in. It's always between you two. Graeme and Elizabeth figured it out. They're like,
yeah.
one's at the end, and then it's
yeah,
Mike.
work on this.
Got it.
Mike can go first. Oh, me? Okay. I'll go. Yeah, so similarly to what Elizabeth was saying, you know, we assess competencies via like performance reviews, we interview managers, so we get a feel for like, where are people generally at? Like, how are they performing in the roles they were hired to do? Do managers feel like they are like skilled enough to meet the tasks and also to take it to the next level and get promoted? Because we run the onboarding program as well for all technical employees, it gives us some insight into the baseline. So if we were thinking, okay, all of our employees should be at this level for this technical skill, and then we made a class at that level, and then they all came in the door and it was clear that they were not getting it, like that gives us some insight into, okay, we were wrong where the baseline is, and that helps us pivot our plans. We assess like on a course by course or topic by topic basis, just with like quizzes and hands-on moments throughout the training, so we know like how we're leveling the content that we're doing, and like again, keeping a close ear on what managers want, what leadership's saying, and that does shape our priorities for where gaps might be. And in terms of assessing internally or externally, it's all internal right now. I wouldn't be opposed to some supplementary external, like say we wanted to start, rather than building 100% of our trainings, we wanted to add some like curated list of free courses we found online. And those obviously come with assessments of their own. So in that case, we made a supplement with some external assessments. Yeah.
Great. And Mike, before you answer too, the one add-on we can ask to this question is, how is that delivered? You know, is it like a once a month sort of email? Is it you have a upskilling day? You know, how is this the assessments delivered to your employees if you're doing that internally?
Yeah, so what we have is a program called the Data Science Academy, which is intended for the next level beyond foundations. And when people attempt to enter into this program, they're provided with an assessment in those three main areas I mentioned earlier: SQL, statistics, and programming. The assessments are developed by our enterprise business intelligence team, which does all the predictive data analytics. They're an internal consulting team. And for the most part, when they take this assessment, we can kind of get a sense for where our macro organization is from a technical perspective. And for the most part, we're using that for people to gain admission into the program. But we're also piloting an assessment within this program for people that are about to graduate. And what we're doing is we're providing them with an assessment that we give to folks that are applying for positions within the EBI team. So that gives people who aren't a part of the EBI organization an opportunity to come in from the outside and test their skills against those that are competing for jobs and roles within the company, within the EBI organization. But one other thing I want to add, Spencer, is that aside from assessing their ability, I believe very strongly in providing a post-program project. So for people to continue to cultivate the skill and practice. So we actually are partnering with different organizations within the company. So I definitely wanted to make sure that I added that point to your question about assessments.
Yeah, I guess a follow-up too is if you're doing a project after, the project gets validation of the skill set after you've done the training itself, right? See, I find a lot of third-party providers, they go through and they do assessments on the front end, but then there's rarely ever sometimes follow-up to validate that the upskilling actually worked. So it's interesting to hear that your approach towards that is project-based, which I guess is applying it as opposed to just a hard number. Does anyone from the panel speak to how you, before you give your answer, Graeme, does anyone on the panel want to speak to how you do the assessment on the back end of the training? Is it just another test or is it project oriented like Mike suggested?
I think certainly for us, it can vary. Again, we're slightly out of kilter from everybody else in that we have a public facing certification program. So that kind of gives us a built-in skills validation approach for our internal training. So we have a technical skills initiative internally. We every year look at what the priorities are for different roles across the company and assign people specific training, specific certification targets or requirements to complete that training. And a lot of that is based on what our public certification offering is. There are some other internal variants, I think, for specific roles that maybe our public certifications don't particularly apply to. But in general, it's that certification program, which is a combination of sort of classical exams and increasingly kind of performance-based testing, where we'll put you in a scenario and get you to solve a particular technical problem. So for that type of validation, we're quite fortunate in that we already have a certification program that we offer to partners and customers.
Yeah, Graeme, I think you're very unique amongst this panel where you have an internal LMS and a skills assessment tool within Microsoft, which is very fortunate. Maybe I'd love to hear on the prior question on how we actually validate that the upskilling is, working in the job once you've done it. Does anyone from Katie or Mike or Elizabeth want to answer that?
Yeah, I would say for general skills, and that's mainly what we're doing now, is more of the foundational skills, and we're using third-party vendors and basically doing online education for that with on-demand content. So with those, we're just relying on if there's a level 2 assessment attached to it to see if there was some basic knowledge transfer. Once we get into the deeper sets as we move forward with Industry 4.0 and automating some of our manufacturing, we'll definitely move into kind of more of what Mike was speaking about and having practical application tests afterwards to make sure that people are actually doing what we're expecting them to do with information.
Yeah, I think it's clever to have, if they're taking another course in the path, if you may, or in some track, then the next entrance exam or entrance assessment is validation of the previous course working. But I also have seen with a lot of the education providers I've worked with in the past, a capstone project, if you may, similar to what Mike is describing, where it's a less, of a test and far more like, can you actually apply this into your job? So I think that's a good opportunity for you to use your own data from your company, Comcast, or from Twitter data to see if they can actually do it in practice. Cool.
Yeah, we're at Twitter, we're definitely moving in that direction of wanting to do more of the project-based competencies after, or putting people in small cohorts and say, you're going to learn this skill for 6 weeks and present a project at the end. And a recent survey I did of all of our learners, I asked them which of the following types of ways would you be interested in to learn more? And it was like, do you want more articles or books, or do you want more? And I had project-based training in there, and far and away people were very, very interested in that. And so that's something we're going to be working to implement more of.
I found that that's similar too in all the previous training experiences I've worked with. The project-based seems to stick the most with participants because then they can associate something with them. Okay, great. So I think we can move on to the next question here. What is your company's process for determining whether to develop training internally or source external education providers? Some of the panelists here have internal platforms, Graeme, to do so, but some of the other panelists may need to not have an internal mandate yet. And I'm very curious how you go about doing a RFP or RFQ process to source external educational providers. So why don't we start with Graeme this time to talk about it first, how you go through it internally, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I mean, as you would guess, most of our kind of training needs are met through internal content development or internal initiatives. It's not to say that that's exclusive. And I think for us, it's really a question of, is this something that internally we have the expertise and the credibility to deliver, or is this perhaps a more general skill? Is it, if we identify a need for core statistics or mathematics, maybe we're not the best person to put that training together. So at that point, we would reach out to a partner organization and, as you say, go through an RFP process, or we would look for something that's publicly available on any one of the various kind of web-based training platforms out there and consume that. So we're not so insular that we do everything internally. We kind of recognize there's a wide world out there and a lot of benefit from that. But certainly the more technical stuff, especially the stuff that's focused on our own technology, would tend to be developed internally just because we have the expertise.
Great. Katie, why don't you speak next? I know you have a similar situation here.
So as I've mentioned, we for technical training at Twitter, we rarely source externally, and it's not so much that we're like, oh, we know better than it's not. As I say that, I thought, oh, it sounds like we don't want anyone else's trainings, but in reality, so the peer-to-peer model is, I would say, the heart and soul of our program. So we've built this community of learners internally who are willing to, give of their time to teach their peers. They learn by skilling up to teach also. So we're growing our employees as instructors, not just learners. And really, I hold on to that with I'm not willing to give up that aspect of our program. I see it works so well and it's so important to us. So were we to have something where we needed someone externally, I'm 100% open to that, but I just find that this works so well for us that we rarely do need to look externally.
Great. Mike, yeah.
Yeah, sure. From our perspective, Spencer, we started our data science with our Data Science Academy in the AI space, and we had our team of data scientists from EBI that created this Data Science Academy, and they actually conducted all of the classes, and we helped arrange, do all the administrative arrangements and so forth. And what happened was that model proved to be way too intrusive to their world, and we needed them, quite frankly, for other tasks. So what we did, we went outside, pulled in a vendor to do the training for us. We quadrupled our throughput, went from a class of 15, now we have 60 folks that we're able to go through, but we've since adapted and evolved again, and we're focused on using internally developed content. But now we are a bit more wise to what we can do to guarantee the same level of throughput while using our internal experts and Comcast data and so forth, and leveraging their expertise.
Great. Thank you so very much, Mike. Elizabeth, I know you are going through the process of developing this now, so I'm curious how your opinion may vary on this.
Yeah, we are heavily dependent on vendors. To be honest, our team is quite small, so we don't typically have the capacity to develop and launch our own training internally. There is a peer-to-peer model in some of our sites around the world, but it's not something that, from the corporate L&D standpoint, that we've put that model into place yet. So when we're talking about scaling large-scale training programs that need to go across our entire organization, it makes more sense for us to use a vendor for an approach like that. So we go through the RFP process. We have an internal procurement team that helps us identify the best fit vendors, and we go through the whole formal process. And unless it's a standardized, if it's a standardized content, like a lot of the data science content that we've seen is available right now online, it just makes more sense for us than developing our own content.
Fantastic. I think this leads in really well to the next question, which is, and maybe you can start with this, Elizabeth. If you're sourcing external providers, how do you, and what are the most important considerations with choosing this? For some companies, you're all very lucky to work for very large enterprises. For smaller companies that don't have the budget or cannot allocate an RFP process, I think it'd be really useful for them to know what are these considerations that are most pertinent when choosing an external provider. And if not, for those who are working entirely internally, what are the most important considerations when developing your own content, right? Is it how to deliver it? Is it to have it be somewhat project-based, to have it be in terms of format? Have you found that it works better for it to be 1 week immersives or spread out over a 6-month period? Anything you can talk on for the internal development in terms of those elements would be really, I think, great to hear. So why don't we start with Elizabeth, and then we'll move on here from there.
Yeah, so with external vendors, some of the things that you spoke about with internal development, we also look for with external vendors. If we're going to source something a bit more complex, we are looking for more of a learning journey following the 70-20-10 model. How do we make sure that we're minimizing the forgetting curve by having post-learning application and follow-up activities as much as we can from the vendor? Get that pre-built into the program is ideal. For us being global, we're always looking for vendors that can accommodate a global audience. So something we run into is making sure that any content is translated into all the language that we have is really important to us. The reputation of the vendor on a global scale is important for us. Flexibility in content and the ability to adapt scenarios. So if you're working with a vendor, they have pre-built scenarios. We want that flexibility and adaptability to make our own, like on semi-specific scenarios, to wrap into their pre-existing content. We also look for vendors that invest in innovation and research trends, so they can tell us the topics of the future to look at that maybe we're not thinking of, and being more of that kind of thought partner. Those are just some of the things. And we always look at doing reference checks with customers and find out, you know, did they produce the service that you expected, and the ROI and the impact, and all of those factors are important.
Great, fantastic. Mike, you look ready to go here.
Oh, sure. Well, we have a policy, I'm sure like most companies, we have to secure at least 3 bids for any and all RFPs that we put out there. But quality of instructional experience is certainly our most important qualifier. And with an area like artificial intelligence, you have to be able to walk the talk. And so we need evidence of, you know, the fact that either they have the academic credentials or you know, work experience, but something that shows us that you have demonstrated that you can do more than just, you know, articulate the competencies and so forth. You have to be able to know how to practically apply it. That's really critical for us. So, you know, that's essentially what we're looking for. We're also looking for evidence of great interaction with our students. And so things like polling are terribly important. So as you're presenting a topic, occasionally introducing a poll where it's anonymized, and then you can see, you know, whether or not you as the instructor are hitting the mark with your audience. So, because occasionally, you know, you'll drift. I mean, these are important topics that they're being discussed, but they're deep, they're dense. And so we also need models that would allow for a certain period of soak for our participants. So we look for all of those things as we're selecting vendors.
Yeah, and you can do the polling if you've already contracted the vendor, and you can do the polling as you use them. You know, you can adjust course and, you know, adjust the way they present it, or maybe change vendors and pivot. But prior to actually bringing a vendor on, you know, how do you assess that ability? Is it length of that vendor being a business? Is it the number, their audience reach? Is it just, you know, the existing reviews out there, like on something like, say, Course Report or just Google? You know, I'd be curious to hear an answer on that, Mike.
Yeah, Elizabeth touched on it very well. We're doing background checks, like we call for references.
Right.
Those are absolutely the same practices that we adhere to. Yeah, and that's how we tackle that.
Got it. Great, thank you.
Just
to break up the order, yeah, let's go with Graeme.
Okay, I think for us, kind of all of the above, and I guess if we are bringing in vendors or partners to work on stuff, a lot of it's about credibility in that specific space. It's you know, is this an organization that we know that has a credible track record in that particular thing? And we have lots and lots of partner organizations that we work with, and you know, one of them might be the ideal person to help us develop some content around, I don't know, SQL Server or, you know, databases, but they might not be the right person to help us develop training around deep learning with PyTorch. So it's about, you know, having that specific credibility in that area. I think it's also about relevance, which is kind of related. We spend an inordinate amount of time and effort doing what we call job task analysis. So we will break down the individual roles that we are targeting training for, and we'll spend a lot of time just really trying to understand, well, what are the specific set of skills that are required to do that role successfully? And we'll speak to both internal and external people who are in that role or in similar roles and get an understanding for, here's the set of skills, and then try and match that with either the internal team or an external vendor that can bring those relevant skills and that relevant experience to make that training relevant for that particular role. And then the final thing I would say that's important to us is, what does the ongoing maintenance look like? If I build training now, you know, we work in the tech area, stuff changes, and it changes very, very quickly. So there's a real challenge in keeping content up to date and making sure that the skills you learned now in 3 months are still relevant, or we need to adapt what we're teaching at that point because things have moved on. And that might be from a technical perspective, or it might be from a philosophical perspective. I think we touched earlier on about the importance of data privacy. That whole area, that whole kind of ethical approach to AI, what we call responsible AI at Microsoft, and other companies have different terminology for the same thing. But how do we start thinking about fairness in models that we build? How do we start thinking about data privacy? How do we think about model explainability? Those have become very, very important. Whereas maybe 2 years ago, we were kind of more focused on, well, just how do I get the model to build? So as the state of the art moves forward and the state of the industry moves forward, we've got to be adaptable and maintain that content and keep it relevant.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. I've seen a lot of these courses started out as just build a model, achieve highest accuracy now, and now the consideration is more what's the effect of it on the business.
Yeah.
Or more, it's interpretability of it. Is that more important than just some evaluation metric optimization?
Exactly.
I think, Katie, do you want to answer this, or should we move on to the last question? We're running a little bit short on time. Why don't we put you first with the last one, okay?
Yeah, and honestly, my answer would have been just +1 to it. A lot of people.
Well, that's good to hear. Glad we have the the right people here. But this one's for you, Katie. So COVID is really changing a lot of industries, but I think L&D is ripe for, really exploding now with COVID. And I really want to focus on how has COVID changed the L&D landscape, or how do you think COVID has changed the L&D landscape moving forward at your company, or just at large?
Yeah, great question. Obviously very relevant. I would say probably the shared thing in the industry is no matter where you were at with remote training or global inclusion, suddenly like we're all on the same page. Suddenly all of our trainings are remote. We have to adapt to, do we make trainings on demand? So that do we do live training still, but learn how to do them online? Were we already doing that? In Twitter's case, we actually had it on our roadmap this year to really focus on remote training and better global inclusion in all time zones and all languages and cultures. And COVID really was just a forcing function for that. We obviously, like most people, found out last minute in March that all of our onboarding was suddenly going to be remote. And so we had engineers onboarding in Singapore, and usually we would fly them to San Francisco. And so the classes are at like an absurd time of night for them. So we had to start skilling up instructors in the APAC region to teach our onboarding courses, and that's been a huge priority for us. I also would say that in addition to like that adaptability and cultural fluency and teaching globally, there's also, with the economy being tumultuous and like if your company's experiencing hiring freeze, like you have to actively demonstrate that your program matters, that it's critical to keep on board given all the trade-offs and potential like question of headcount and resources. And so demonstrating that it's critical, and also the skills you're teaching enable employees to stay relevant to companies. So they think, okay, if I spend time on that training, it's going to increase my job security because I'm getting the skills from it that I need to show that I'm an employee worth keeping. I think people are just feeling like less stable than normal. And so helping people feel that, okay, my training is going to help you increase your job stability and confidence is really important right now.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies, thank you first. I think that was a very in-depth answer. I think a lot of companies, something I want to focus on, I think a lot of companies had a agenda to have remote learning, but now we've been forced to adopt it really quickly. And I found that a lot of education providers, the most effective learning that sticks with employees is some version of a hybrid model where it's partially remote, where you do some self-training at home, and then there's maybe the project-oriented element that's, with a group of peers in person, or having a follow-up with an instructor to really validate what you've learned on your own. So how do we think that's been adjusted, besides just moving that all remote? How do you think we're going to move forward with that? Maybe who wants to take a stab?
I was going to jump in and say, I think you hit the nail on the head with the hybrid thing. I think a blended approach, we've experimented with blended learning channels for years, right? There's nothing new there. And I think there has been a trend towards moving things online. From our perspective, you know, online deliveries of live training have been a thing for a long time. On-demand training online has been a thing for a long time. And in the past couple of years, we've moved exams online. So we're doing proctored, you know, tests and certification exams online. But I think now the COVID thing has sort of been a forcing function to make that reach critical mass. And I think we're now being innovative about, well, how do we make this work and make sure that so that it is the best of all worlds? It's not just, hey, how do we reduce costs by putting it online? It's how do we actually solve the skilling problem, which, as Katie says, is more acute because people are concerned about their career prospects. They're concerned in this changing world, you know, what impact this is going to have on them. They're looking at the economy falling apart around them and they're worried. How do we take those online modalities, if you like, and get the best out of them? How do I have the best of instructor-led combined with the best of on-demand and the best with kind of blended solutions to really solve the skills gap and move the ball forward a little bit? So it's, in some ways, it's a horrible situation. Don't get me wrong. I don't think this is a good thing at all, but there are some kind of bright spots in that it's forcing innovation, which I think is really interesting.
I could not agree more. We're running a little bit short on time, so why don't we get 30 seconds answers here from Mike and Elizabeth?
Yeah, just to add.
Sure.
Oh.
Why don't we go with Elizabeth first? Sorry.
Same as what Katie and Graeme said, with pivoting quickly to a virtual environment. Our 2021 strategy is a hybrid delivery model, but think about how in my team, we've reduced spend by 30%. How do you justify going back to that model when we're running and people are attending and they're enjoying it and we're getting a 242% increase in online engagement with content from Q1 to Q2. So we have to be innovative, as Graeme said, and think about how can we really take a hold of this hybrid approach and make sure that it has the greatest impact possible. So we're doing a lot of analysis right now with surveys and post-learning data to find out what is most critical to in-person and live, and what can we do online as pre-work and flipped classroom model, again, going back to that strategy moving forward.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Mike,
yeah,
last but not least, again.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say among our panelists, I'll say something that I think is probably going to resonate with each of us. COVID has presented an opportunity for our learners to really hit the gas during this experience. And so when you look at the opportunities that exist, we have self-paced, we have all these great learning programs available. We've made it possible for people to do just that. And I have to say, I love the fact that our employees are embracing this idea of upskilling at a time when, you know, other people could wallow in the, you know, the atrocities of what COVID brings to us. But the truth is there are some time slots that people have available. So I want to say that is kind of the silver lining that's come with COVID, that we've seen a spike in the demand for our training programs. So really happy to report on that.
Yeah, I agree with you all. I think this has been a tumultuous time, but it's almost, I said remote learning, this has sped it up by probably a decade, right? This is kerosene on the fire of adoption here. And although it's tough, I think ultimately it will provide better L&D in the long run. Well, we're at a time. I wanted to thank again this fabulous panel with working at some of the companies at the forefront of L&D. Again, I just wanted to thank you for your time. It's been great and informative. I wish you all the best in your post-COVID L&D world.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for everyone else, all the participants here, if you're interested in the trainings we're doing at AI4, you can go to ai4.co/trainings and look forward to speaking with you. Thanks again.